They say a man's home is his castle. But in modern America, your castle has a landlord you never asked for, the Homeowners Association. Most HOAs are just groups of neighbors arguing over the shade of beige on a fence. But some are small-scale dictatorships run by people who failed at every other form of authority in their lives. Enter Richard. Richard didn't just want to manage the neighborhood. He wanted to own it. He was the kind of man who measured your grass with a digital caliper and sent a $50 fine if a single blade was 0.2 inches over the limit. But his crowning achievement was the Quick Clip Parking Initiative. He made an app in which all guest vehicles were required to get registered within 5 minutes of their arrival in the neighborhood, or they would get towed after the 5-minute deadline. Richard owned Apex Recovery and Towing. And he made Apex the exclusive enforcer of our streets. He turned our driveways into a hunting ground. The night it all went wrong wasn't a normal night. It was a Tuesday in November, cold and sleeting. My sister, Sarah, called me bawling her eyes out. My 6-year-old nephew Leo had fallen from a backyard playset. He was conscious, but his arm was at an angle that made her stomach turn. Sarah is a single mom. She was hyperventilating, her car was low on gas, and she lived only 3 minutes from me. I told her to drive to my place. It was closer to the regional trauma center. She pulled into my driveway at 7:14 p.m. I saw her headlights from the window. I grabbed my jacket and my keys. I was out the door by 7:18 p.m. 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, a black Apex tow truck had already reversed into my driveway. The driver, a guy with a neck tattoo and a smirk that said he enjoyed his job too much, was already hooking the chains to Sarah's front axle. "Stop!" I yelled. "This is a medical emergency. My nephew is hurt." The driver didn't even look up. "Register the car on the portal?" We didn't have time. "Look at him." I pointed to Leo, who was sobbing in the back seat, holding his mangled arm. "Not my problem," the driver said. "Rules say 5 minutes. My GPS log says you've been stationary for 6. That's a hook fee of $250. Cash only or it goes to the impound." I looked at the clock. He was lying. It had been 4 minutes. But in Richard's world, the tow truck's clock was the only one that mattered. I paid the fee. I had to. My nephew needed a surgeon, not a legal debate in a driveway. But as I handed over the cash, I saw the driver scribble something on a notepad. It wasn't a receipt. It was a tally mark next to a name, R. Miller. Richard Miller. Our HOA president. The next day, after Leo was out of surgery and casted up, I went to Richard's house. I wanted an apology. I wanted my $250 back. Richard met me at the door wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of scotch. He didn't even let me finish my sentence. "Listen, kid," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Safety requires discipline. If I make an exception for your sister, I have to make one for everyone. The board has sole discretionary power over the common areas and driveways. It's in the bylaws. Maybe instead of yelling at me, you should spend some time reading them. Knowledge is power, right?" He slammed the door. That was his first mistake. He assumed I was lazy. He assumed that because I was a kid, in his eyes, I wouldn't have the patience for 150 pages of 8-point font legal jargon. I went home. I made a pot of black coffee. And I sat down with the big blue book, the CCNRs of the Oak Ridge Estates. For 3 nights I didn't sleep. I turned into a suburban detective. Most people think the HOA is all-powerful. They aren't. They are a corporation, and like any corporation, they are bound by the state's Nonprofit Corporation Act and their own founding documents. I found the first crack around 2 a.m. on Friday. Article 8, Section 4, Conflict of Interest. It stated that any contract exceeding $5,000 per year must be put out for a competitive bid to at least 3 independent vendors. I checked the HOA's public annual budget. They were paying Apex Recovery a security and enforcement retainer of $4,500 per month. That was $54,000 a year. And there was no record of a competitive bid. Then I found the nuclear option. Hidden in Article 12, Section 9, was a clause titled Member-Initiated Financial Verification. It was written in 1991, back when the original developer was trying to prove to nervous buyers that their money wouldn't be stolen. It said, upon the written request of 1% of the voting power of the association, the board shall, within 14 days, provide access to all original invoices, bank statements, and vendor contracts for the preceding 3 fiscal years. Furthermore, if discrepancies exceeding $1,000 are found, the association shall be liable for the cost of a professional forensic audit. I did the math. We had 300 homes. 1% of 300 is 3. I didn't need a revolution. I didn't need a mob. I just needed 2 other people who hated Richard as much as I did. I knew exactly who to go to. First was Mrs. Gable. She was 82 years old and had lived here since the beginning. Richard had fined her $100 because her grandson drew a hopscotch grid in chalk on her sidewalk. Second was Marcus. He was a contractor who had been blocked from building a wheelchair ramp for his elderly father because Richard claimed it violated the aesthetic harmony of the street. I showed them what I found. I showed them the math. I didn't ask for a protest. I just asked for a signature on a single sheet of paper. What will this do? Mrs. Gable asked, her hand trembling as she held the pen. It's going to turn his scotch into vinegar, I told her. She signed with a smile. On Monday morning I didn't go to Richard. I went to the HOA's third-party management company, the professional firm that actually cut the checks. I walked into their office with my attorney, a guy named Miller, no relation to Richard, who specialized in HOA takedowns. We dropped the petition on the desk. The property manager looked at the signatures, then at the specific bylaw I had highlighted. Her face went pale. We'll have to notify the board president, she stammered. Actually, my lawyer said, the bylaws state you have to provide the documents first, to ensure the board doesn't have the opportunity to reconcile the records. You have 14 days. We'll be back with a scanner. The documents told the story of a man who thought he was a genius. Richard wasn't just getting a retainer. The towing logs revealed that Apex Recovery was charging the HOA for patrol hours that didn't exist. On nights when the neighborhood was quiet, Richard was billing the HOA $150 an hour for security sweeps, while he was actually at home asleep. But the smoking gun was the kickback ledger. Richard had a separate bank account listed under a shell company. Every time a resident paid a $250 drop fee or a $450 impound fee to Apex Recovery, 20% of that cash was transferred into the HOA's social committee fund, which Richard had sole signing authority over. He was using the neighbor's misery to fund his own personal board president travel and dining expenses. He had used HOA money to take his wife to Vegas 3 times in 2 years, labeling the trips as urban planning seminars, but no proof of any invitations or that the seminars were actually real, which obviously they weren't. When the 14 days were up, we didn't go to a board meeting. We went to the state attorney general's office. The emergency meeting was the most attended event in Oak Ridge history. 290 out of 300 homes showed up. Richard tried to take the stage. He tried to act the victim. This is a witch hunt, he screamed. I kept your property values high. I kept the riff-raff out. My lawyer stood up and handed out copies of the Vegas receipts. He handed out the bank statements showing the social fund being drained at Caesar's Palace. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face went from bright red to a ghostly white. He realized then that he wasn't just losing his position. He was losing his license. He was losing his reputation. The state attorney general moved fast. Because the HOA involved interstate commerce and mail fraud, the charges were serious. Richard was forced to resign immediately. His towing company Apex Recovery was sued into oblivion by a class action suit from the residents. To pay the $120,000 judgment and the back taxes, Richard had to liquidate his assets. The irony? The man who spent his life obsessed with the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood had to put a giant, ugly foreclosure sign in his front yard. He moved out in the middle of the night. Nobody helped him pack. The first thing the new board did? They bought a $500 gift card to a local toy store for my nephew, Leo. And then we held a bylaw burning party in the common area. We kept the rules that made sense, and we shredded every single one that Richard had written to fill his own pockets. Because knowledge isn't just power. Knowledge is the key to the cage. If you're living under a petty tyrant today, don't scream. Don't fight them in the street. Just go home and open the book. They always leave a trail. Thanks for watching. If you want to hear more stories of bullies getting what they deserve, hit that subscribe button. And remember, always read the fine print. See you in the next one.